Good morning. Good morning. I'd like to extend a hearty welcome on behalf of the Black History Commission of Arkansas to our symposium titled African American and Religion in Arkansas. A great deal of research has been done, and we look forward to hearing some of that research. Let me give you a little information regarding the Black History Commission of Arkansas, which is under the Division of Arkansas Heritage. And as you know, that's where our state historian is located, and our Arkansas State Archives is also located there. History records that Act 1233 was introduced in 1991, and it established the Black History Committee. 4 years later, in 1995, Act 980 changed the name to Black History Commission of Arkansas. The Black History Commission of Arkansas is a 7-member commission appointed by the governor to promote and to preserve Black history in Arkansas. We do a number of activities. Among those are collecting material on African American Black history and its history makers, as well as we advise the Arkansas State Archives regarding gathering, developing, and keeping history of Black Arkansans. We also make awards to the Curtis Site grants to individuals and to organizations that project, that collect, that promote and preserve the history and the heritage of Black contributions to Arkansas. In 1993, Act 197 directed the State Board of Education to cooperate with the Black History Commission of Arkansas to develop a program to increase racial and ethnic sensitivity of teachers and of administrators within Arkansas's public schools. And finally, let me say that Act 326 of 1997 created the Black History Task Force that would operate under the Arkansas Department of Education, but whose members would be appointed by the chair of the Black History Commission of Arkansas. We have funded a number of programs and activities to keep the dream alive for Arkansas history, and today is no exception. Please enjoy yourself, enjoy your luncheon, your breakfast, your brunch, and take copious notes, because I, as a professor, will be tested. Thank you so very much, and enjoy.
Good morning. Good morning. And welcome again. My name is Carla Coleman, and I will be introducing Reverend Edna Mack-Pettigrew. Since answering the call to ministry in 1981, the Reverend Edna Ruth Mack-Pettigrew has been a trailblazer for women in ministry in Arkansas, especially those in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. Called to preach when she was 10. It was not until she had joined Bethel AME Church Little Rock in 1974 that she answered that call. In 1981, she joined the Arkansas Annual Conference as a licensed minister. In 1984, she was ordained itinerant elder and went on to pastor 3 churches in Arkansas. Reverend Pettigrew is an associate minister at Bethel AME Church. During her many years of service, she has served several ministries, including the church school, Vacation Bible School, Shepherd Ministry, Sick and Shut-In Ministry, the Relief Ministry. She currently serves as president of Class Leaders Council and is director of evangelism. She served as secretary of Arkansas Annual Conference for a number of years and has been a member of the Arkansas Conference Women in Ministry since its formal organization in Arkansas in 2001. She's held many offices on the conference level, including serving 2 prior times as Arkansas Conference Women in Ministry Coordinator. She is now serving her 3rd term as conference coordinator. She is also a member of Toastmasters International and a charter member of Class Act Toastmasters. She is president of the club Class Act Toastmasters. She was born in Little Rock to Lottie Chiliest. Okay, all right. And she received her early education in Little Rock Public Schools before graduating from Oakland High in Oakland, California. She attended the University of California at Hayward, California until her junior year. She returned to Arkansas and received her bachelor's degree in liberal arts and with sociology emphasis from the University of Arkansas Little Rock. She did graduate work in UALR School of Gerontology and completed 15 hours towards a Master's of Ecclesiastical Studies at Jackson Theological Seminary in North Little Rock. Reverend Mack-Pettigrew loves to praise God, and God has been her rock. She has been, she retired in June of 2018 after 26 years of service. She is presently married to Calvin Pettigrew, and they have 4 children together, 7 grandchildren, and 9 great-grandchildren. Strength and the comforter for many years God has been for her, and especially since the loss of her daughter, mother, and sister in recent years. God has kept his promise to be her comforter. God is not a man that he should lie, nor son of a man that he should repent. Has he said, and will he not do, or has he spoken and will not make it good? Numbers 23:19. I introduce to you now Reverend Pettigrew.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here today, and I want to thank Sister Carla Coleman and thank Reverend Betty White, who told me about the event. And surprise, surprise, I thought it was some church event that I was supposed to be explaining ministry in the AME church until Tatiana called me and told me what it was all about. I was rushing around trying to get ready for my part-time job. And I was so shocked, I thought, let me talk to you later. But I appreciate the opportunity. Thank those who made it possible for me to speak here today. I belong to Bethel AME Church, as it was said, and my pastor is Reverend Truman Tollfree. Today I want to talk about I am a woman. I am a minister. I am a woman. I am a minister. Many years ago, when I was fresh in the ministry, I decided after church to go pick me up some lunch. So I went into this restaurant, buffet restaurant, to get me something to eat. As I walked in, all eyes were on me. And you know the first thing you think is my slip showing? But then I realized, you have on your collar. And back then, in the 80s, that was a number. You didn't see many women ministers. As a matter of fact, at that time, I probably could have counted at least 5 on one hand that I knew. Growing up in the AME Zion Church, St. Paul AME Zion Church, there was one woman who I thought was perhaps a minister, but she always spoke from the floor. She didn't wear a collar like our pastor. I never heard her being called reverend like our pastor. And that was the only place that I had come in contact with anybody that might have been minister back in that day. I didn't really have any mentors. Am I clicking it wrong? I really didn't have any mentors when I went into the ministry. And knew of no other women being ministers. And thought that me being a minister was a 20th century phenomenon. But it was not. There are women that became ministers, preachers, that go far back as 1700. The earliest one named was Elizabeth. Elizabeth was a black woman that preached nearly 50 years, traveling extensively over the United States and Canada. A book was written about her in 1863, I believe it was, that an old memorial of, old Elizabeth memorial. And then that particular one was, and Elizabeth held her first prayer meeting in Baltimore in 1808. And her book was updated by the Quakers called Colored. A colored minister of the gospel. Born in Slavery, and is republished by the Quakers in 1869. Joanna Lee is another one. That is the first woman to be authorized to preach in the African Methodist Episcopal Church, AME Church. That's my church. And she was ordained possibly during the AME 50th quadrennial on April 6, 2016. When I read her book, it brought tears to my eyes, the things that she had went through to become a minister. She first approached Bishop Allen, Richard Allen, that she had been called to preach. Elder Bishop Allen said, we don't have any female preachers, and he put her off. And then one day, she was at a service, and one of the men got up and sung a song and read a scripture and was getting ready to he gave his text, and then after that, he couldn't say anything. And she immediately sprung up, Joanna Lee did, and began to preach from that same text that he had given. The bishop was in the presence of this, and then realized that he needed to authorize her to preach. This is Julie Jane Tillman. In the Library of Congress hangs a lithograph that is entitled Miss Julianne Jane Tillman, AME Preacher. Now, the strange thing about Julianne is there is no life, no birth or death information about her. This is the only thing that is known about her, besides being quoted in a newspaper in 1837, which was discovered some years ago, the newspaper article in somebody's Bible here recently. Julia A.J. Foote. She is the first woman to be ordained as a deacon in the Edna Church in 1894 and second to be ordained as an elder in 1899. Her life is recounted in the autobiography, A Brand Plucked from the Fire, an autobiographical sketch. And she suffered greatly with discrimination and sexism because of her gender. And this is true of all these women. Harriet Baker announced her call to preach at the AME Church in 1872. Her husband did not like that. He opposed her. And her pastor told her, said from the pulpit, that no woman could be preaching. And you know, it's interesting was that a lot of times churches I went to were like Baptist churches, whatever, and I had to preach from the floor. Except one church, a Baptist church that I went to, and this preacher, he said, would you join me in my study? And I went in, and he asked me, did God call you? And I said, yes, he did. He said, well, you know, I'm not going to stand in the way of God. And he said, you will speak from the pulpit today. And that was in the 80s. Mary G. Evans, 1891-1966. She was licensed to preach at age 14 by the AME Church. She is the first woman to receive a doctorate of divinity from Wilberforce University. She is best known as serving the pastor of Cosmopolitan Community Church in Chicago for 34 years. Can you believe that? Back in that day, that she preached that long, she took a basement block, that church, it was basement block, garage block, and turned it into a modern Ephesus. She put a gymnasium in the basement. She had 2 playgrounds. She added a home for children, added a home for the aged. Mary G. Evans. Martha J. Keyes, 1892-1975. Here is the first woman to be ordained in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. She was the author of the 1933 gospel drama, The Comforter. And I just want to go to tell you, make sure I get it right. Keyes campaigned and introduced a bill to the AME Congress for the ordination of women as interim elders in 1935 and or 1936, and again in 1940. In 1936, the AME Conference, where she was a delegate, she earned the support of her cohorts of prominent ministers, the residing elders of Cleveland, Ohio, and the AME Women's Missionary Society to accomplish the goals of her bills. Though it was initially rejected, she vowed to continue introducing and campaigning for the bill until it was enacted. Finally, in 1960, the AME subsequently removed all restrictions placed on women advancement in leadership roles. Yay, that means I can be an untitled Vashti Murphy Kennedy, Bishop Vashti Murphy Kennedy. She is the first woman to be a bishop in all of the denominations. She made history. And then in 2005, she made history again by becoming the head of a denomination. I got a chance to meet her this past April. She is a powerful speaker. Now, if you look at this chart here, you can see where clergy women have grown in mainline denominations. 1977, we were 2.8. 1986, 10.0. 1994, 15.5. 2017, 32.0. Today, women comprise of 1/5 of all the clergy in the United States. 1/5. When we started in 1960, 2.3% of women were ministers, but only a few were pastors. In this instance now, many women are pastors, a huge majority of them. As I was researching and looking for things about Arkansas women in the ministry, I found very little. So what I decided to do was interview 5 Arkansas women ministers. 3 were AME, 2 were of the Apostolic Pentecostal religion. I wanted to know what challenges they faced in the 80s and 90s, 70s, 80s, and 90s when they came into the ministry. And I wanted to know what was different about them than about the women in history. What was different? And when I began to look at the things that women ministers had went through, I could see that there were barely any difference between women of old and women today. They both suffered from sexism, discrimination, because they were ministers. They both suffered people putting them down, opposing them because they were ministers, and people reading select scriptures to them to show them that they were not allowed to be ministers. I read Joanna Lee's book, and she said, if Christ died for man and woman, would not God let women be preachers, seeing how he died for both of us? When I counted these women's accomplishments, one that started a church and is now building new edifice today, one that pioneered the women's ministry and formally organized it to what it is in the ALB church today, women who spoke out when men tried to put her down, when she would broadcast about women in the ministry events, and they asked her if she wouldn't mind stop doing that, and she said no. And as a matter of fact, they didn't want her to talk about her being a minister. And she said that, I don't have any control over this. You'll have to talk to God about this. So these women, they are all, except one, ordained. And that was the youngest one. And she is studying, she's in her 2nd year, and studying to be ordained. When I look at them, they all had that call like Joanna Lee did, like Elizabeth did, like Harriet did. They had this call on them. And when I think about that call, I think about myself. When I was about 10 years old, I was at church upstairs in the fellowship hall of St. Paul, A.B. Zion Church on 12th and Spring. And I had this urging to go down to the sanctuary. And I kept having the feeling, so I just got up and went on down. Now, we were not allowed in the sanctuary, unless it was church time. So I crept up to the door, peeped inside. It was so serene in there. And looked in and slowly brought my body all the way in. When I brought my turning wildly around, praising God, glorifying his name, and thanking him. Mind you, I was 10 years old. And then when I stopped, I realized I was in the house of God, and I had never seen anybody dance in the church. So I was like afraid. What was that? What was that about? And then years later, as God kept urging me, until I was 29, that I accepted the ministry. I remember how free I felt. Once I made that decision to be a minister. And when I compiled all that information about the women, the one thing that stood out, though they was opposed, maybe by family, maybe by preachers, telling them they can't have a particular church. One minister preached for and pastored for 10 years and went to our home church, only to have our home church totally woman. Right. So amid all this, the joy of their salvation, the joy that they answered that call, made them wildly free. Wildly free. And they were glad that they could say, I am a woman. I am a minister. Thank you. Are there any questions? I will tell you what I know.
I just wanted to your research is more public utilized. Are we able to privy to the research that you did?
I can't hear you.
Are we privy to the research information that you gathered?
Sure, I will get that to them. Mostly all of it, it's on the internet.
It is.
It's surprisingly that you could just put in Lee, Vatican McKinney, Julia A.J. Foote, and you pull up their information. You can even pull up their books, Lee and Elizabeth's books. They are free online.
I was referring directly to the interviews that you did, that you said you conducted in the speech.
The what?
Interviews.
Oh, the interview.
Yes, ma'am.
I did not give any names of the interviews. I need to say that. I did not give any names of the people that I interviewed because I wanted them to speak freely. And so to tell me things that, that they may not want known out about their calling and what, discriminations because they're still within their own church. And we still have to, answer roll call, what have you. You don't want nobody striking your character. I know there's a few AMEs in here, they know what that means. Sure.
So I was raised in the church of Christ.
Yes.
Very different from Methodist and Apostle.
Right.
Do you know of any ministers, women ministers that
not. I had someone who was a bishop that was supposed to give me information, and I never received it. And I did not find, but there are, I chose these different women, but there are so many more that I left out. So, and I did not deal with the present, I guess after 19, I included Bishop McKenzie, but she is the only one that I included that was of this age. After 1966, I think is when Mary G. Evans passed. And so anybody after that, I did not include. You can find, I don't know how many in and there's so many books. Now, to tell you the problem with Arkansas is I don't think there's any data with what's in Arkansas. And I'm hoping to get with some people to rectify that, because we need to know what is happening with the women in Arkansas. I want to know who was the first woman to be ordained in the AOD Church in Arkansas. I know in the United Methodist Church, there in the 1980s, there was a woman that was first ordained as a minister. She was, her name was, I think, Irma Harris. And so, but there's no other information. Now, I probably will have to go down to the Butler Center. I probably will have to go to our AOD church minutes to look up present day 1980 for young. And that was the reason why I interviewed those women, is because I was finding very little about folks in women in Arkansas from the 70s to the present time. And I know like our first woman presiding elder, her name was Polly. Can't think of the last name, Polly. My cousin would hit me if she knew I couldn't know Polly's last name. But anyway, that needs to be straightened out. And what I hope from this presentation, if there was some woman that wanted to go into the ministry, that they would feel free, that they could take up the cross and, preach the gospel that God is calling. The joy of answering the call far outweighs the criticism and the different things that you have to go through. Yes.
I got a question. To clarify, you said 20.7% of women are pastors, but not women ministers. What's the difference? What's the difference between a pastor and a minister?
Okay, a pastor has a church. When I was ordained an elder, I was, when I was ordained a deacon, which is after 2 years, after 2 years of studies, I was ordained a deacon. I could do things in the pulpit and read the scripture and what have you, just like a lay person could do. And I could preach, but the difference, I could preach a sermon. Then I was ordained an elder. That, when I was ordained an elder, I could give out communion. I could marry somebody. Okay, then after I was ordained an elder, I was sent to a church, and then I became a pastor. So it's like you hold the you know, I'm an architect elder right now, but I'm not a pastor because I don't have a church. So that's the difference between a minister and a pastor.
And, one more thing, ordains, who ordains you? I mean, you said you are ordained.
Bishop Frederick James.
Is he head over the?
He was over Arkansas, Oklahoma, 12th district of the AME Church. The AME Church has 20 districts all over all over the world.
So is it because you went through the steps, you became you studied the deaconship, and then you went to the elder, then that's the steps to be ordained from the bishop?
Those are steps.
Yes.
Okay, that's the steps, okay.
Well, let me give you the steps. The steps are, first, you go to your pastor. Then the pastor brings you up to the official board. And after the official board of that church. And then they bring you to the quarterly conference, which then you are licensed to preach, which means you can preach anywhere with the permission of your pastor. Okay. Then you enter your first year of studies when you go you go before the bishop at an annual conference, and you go before him, and you start your first year studies, and they give you a number of books you have to read, you have to do tests on the books and that kind of thing. Then the next year you come before the bishop again, and you they pass you according to how well you've done. Go to second year, third year, fourth year, and that's how it proceeds. Second year is when you ordain deacon. Fourth year is when if you pass fourth year, that's when you ordain elder.
What does AME mean? What does AME?
I'm sorry. I meant to really clarify that. African Methodist Episcopal Church. It was the church that was started by Richard Allen in the 1800s.
Well, I had a question. I was listening to your steps, so we have all these theological schools and stuff, so you don't have to go to school and get your theology certificate to be a...
Well, they always wanted you to have an education, not necessarily the theological education, but now they stress that more. So you can't get to that fourth year unless you also have training in the seminary.
Okay, so I was just trying to wrap this all around my head, so I was just sitting in the pew and I said, I want to be a minister, I want to preach. All I had to do was go to the pastor and follow those steps, is what you were saying earlier.
Well, see, now, I do not know the steps that they have to take in other denominations. I just can tell you.
Yeah, I was talking about your denomination, what you were talking about, because I was to your steps. And
Yeah.
if I was just a member of the church and I decided, hey, I want to be a pastor or preacher one day, I just go up to the pastor and say, hey, I think I should preach. And we just go.
No, I think the first thing he gonna say, have you been called? No, you got to you need to talk with the pastor, and he will have a conversation with you, an in-depth conversation with you, whether you've been called or not.
Okay, yeah, okay, that's what I was looking for.
And you have training everywhere.
Okay,
Not only
clarification.
yeah, not only did I have training, our pastor, who was Reverend R.K. Young, he trained us also. So that was, they had training all the way around.
Awesome. Does anybody else have any more questions?
Following up on her question. So basically, everything from an individual rests upon that pastor. Basically, I feel that I'm called.
Yeah.
I talk to the pastor, so he's waiting to hear something in particular upon my call? No, it's
That's
not.
the, they don't, I mean, if you've been called, you've been called.
Okay, okay. So he's not-
He can't determine
Okay.
whether you have a call, but he's gonna question you.
Okay,
If you know, ask you some questions about it. But he does not determine whether, you know if you've been called.
so basically, you know.
Yeah, you know
Feel like
you've been called.
So he's not necessarily.
He can't stop it,
Okay.
if that's what you're asking.
Okay.
Yeah, he can't stop it.
You may find this interesting. I bet you mentioned that you preached from the pulpit at Baptist church.
Yeah.
I come from a Kojic and a Baptist background, and I've been a teacher for decades. About 2 decades ago, I was invited from an AME church to speak at a men's day ceremony. And they put me in the pulpit to speak. That was something else. I was quite impressed. I came back and I told my wife,